December 1900. Off the wild, storm-swept coast of northwest Scotland lies a cluster of desolate, uninhabited rocks known as the Flannan Isles. On the largest of these cliffs, Eilean Mor, stands a newly built lighthouse, a solitary beacon designed to guide massive iron ships through the treacherous, pitch-black waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The lighthouse was manned by 3 experienced keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. These were tough, disciplined men, accustomed to extreme isolation, howling winds, and the endless, crushing silence of the sea. Their job was simple, yet vital: keep the light burning at all costs. For without it, the jagged rocks below would tear any passing vessel to pieces. But on the night of December 15th, something went terribly wrong. The steamer ship Archer, fighting its way through a heavy storm, sailed past the Flannan Islands. The crew on deck strained their eyes through the blinding rain, but the horizon remained pitch black. The great light of Eilean Mor, which should have been visible for miles, was completely dead. The captain made a note of the failure in his logbook, but due to the fierce weather, he couldn't investigate. It wasn't until December 26th, 11 days later, that the relief ship Hesperus finally arrived at the island. As the ship anchored in the freezing waters, the captain blew the steam whistle, expecting the keepers to come down to the landing platform with their usual flag. But there was no flag. No one was waiting on the rocks. Only the cold, echoing scream of the wind answered them. The heavy iron anchor of the Hesperus splashed into the freezing gray water, but the silence that followed was deafening. Joseph Moore, the relief lighthouse keeper, stood on the deck, staring up at the towering black cliffs of Eilean Mor. He had made this trip dozens of times, but today, something felt deeply wrong. The wind carried no voices, and no yellow flag of welcome waved from the landing platform. Sensing immediate danger, the captain ordered a small wooden rowboat to be lowered. Moore stepped inside, his heart pounding against his ribs as the crew rowed through the violent, freezing surf toward the slippery stone steps. As soon as the boat hit the rocks, Moore jumped out and began the steep, exhausting climb up the cliff alone. The air was freezing, and the only sound was the aggressive crashing of the Atlantic waves below. When he finally reached the entrance of the lighthouse, he found the heavy wooden door tightly shut and locked from the inside. He knocked heavily, his shouts instantly swallowed by the howling wind. No one answered. With trembling hands, Moore used his spare key to force the door open. He stepped into the dark, circular hallway, shouting the names of his friends. James, Thomas, Donald. Only a hollow, freezing echo returned. The interior of the lighthouse was clean, but it felt like a tomb. Moore slowly walked into the kitchen, and what he saw there made the hair on his arms stand up. Sitting on the wooden table was a meal that had never been finished. 3 plates of food, now covered in cold green mold, with rusty spoons still resting inside the bowls. Next to the table, a heavy wooden chair lay overturned on its side, as if someone had stood up in an extreme hurry, knocking it over in panic. Moore moved his hand toward the massive cast-iron stove. It was ice cold. The ashes in the fireplace had been dead for days, but the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Moore walked over to the grandfather clock ticking against the stone wall. Except it wasn't ticking. The heavy brass pendulum was frozen in place. The clock had stopped working days ago. frozen at exactly the same hour. The entire station looked as if time itself had decided to die. As Mor stood alone in the freezing, silent kitchen, a terrifying realization washed over him. Whatever had happened to the three men, it had bypassed all defenses, entered this locked fortress, and snatched them away without leaving a single trace of a struggle. Unable to find a single soul inside the cold stone tower, Joseph Mor ran back down to the landing platform to alert the crew of the Hesperus. Within an hour, a full search party ascended the jagged cliffs of Eilean Mor. They began exploring every square inch of the desolate island, looking for any logical explanation. When they reached the western landing pad, the hardened sailors stopped in their tracks, frozen in sheer disbelief. The sheer force of destruction left on the rocks was staggering. A massive iron storage box bolted heavily into the solid rock 40 feet above the sea level had been completely ripped from its foundations. Its thick metal sides were twisted and torn open like cheap paper, and the heavy winter supplies inside were scattered across the cliffs or washed away into the abyss. Even more shocking, the massive iron railings lining the stone steps, designed to withstand the most brutal Atlantic storms, were bent, warped, and forced out of shape by an incomprehensible power. It looked as though a giant, mythical beast had crawled out of the dark water and violently thrashed against the island's defenses. But the physical destruction wasn't the most disturbing puzzle the search party would uncover that day. Back inside the lighthouse, investigators found the official logbook kept by Thomas Marshall. The final handwritten entries shattered any remaining sense of logic, sending a wave of absolute dread through the men. On December 12th, Marshall had written, "Severe gale. Heavy winds, such as I have never witnessed in 20 years. James Ducat is very quiet, and Donald MacArthur is crying." MacArthur was a veteran sailor, a notoriously tough, hardened Scotsman known for his bar-brawling nature. The idea of him weeping in a corner because of a storm made no sense. The logbook grew even more terrifying. The entry for December 13th stated that the storm was still raging and that all three men had gathered together to pray. They were safe inside a brand new, indestructible stone fortress built 100 feet above the ocean. Why were they praying for their lives? And then, the final chilling sentence was recorded on December 15th. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. When the investigators cross-referenced these dates with maritime records from the mainland, they discovered a horrifying truth. There was no storm. On December 12th, 13th, and 14th, the weather in the entire region was perfectly calm, and the skies were completely clear. The brutal tempest that had driven these three experienced men to tears, panic, and desperate prayer existed only in one place, on the lonely haunted rock of Eilean Mor. The terrifying anomalies found in the logbook and the violent destruction on the western cliffs sent shockwaves through the northern lighthouse board. To prevent a national panic, the government dispatched their top investigator, Robert Muirhead, to Eilean Mor. Muirhead was a brilliant, cold-blooded strategist who knew all three missing keepers personally. He arrived on the island with a single goal: to find a logical, scientific explanation for a case that seemed to defy the laws of reality. Muirhead began a grueling, meticulous inspection of the entire station. He verified that the kitchen had been left clean, the lamps were carefully trimmed, and the oil reservoirs were completely full. The lighthouse was fully functional, ready to be lit at a moment's notice. But as he dug deeper into the men's personal belongings, he found a bizarre clue that shattered the official timeline. Inside the wardrobe, Donald MacArthur's heavy oilskin coat and sea boots were still hanging on their pegs. This meant the notoriously aggressive, rule-abiding veteran had rushed out into the freezing pitch-black night wearing nothing but his indoor civilian clothes. For an experienced lighthouse keeper on a brutal winter island, stepping outside without protective gear was a suicidal act. Muirhead was forced to reconstruct a desperate theory to satisfy his superiors. He argued that on the afternoon of December 15th, a sudden monstrous freak wave, a mountain of black water common in the North Atlantic, had rapidly approached the western landing platform. Seeing the danger from the window, Thomas Marshall and James Duckett rushed down to secure the loose equipment. When they failed to return, a panicked Donald MacArthur abandoned his post, knocking over the kitchen chair, and ran out into the madness to save his brothers, only for a second giant wave to sweep all three men into the freezing, bottomless abyss. It was a neat, comforting theory for the newspapers, but the gaps in Moorhead's logic were massive. If the sea was calm and the storm had ended on December 15th, as the logbook claimed, where did this sudden, monstrous wave come from? Furthermore, the rules of the lighthouse service were absolute. Under no circumstances were all three keepers allowed to leave the tower at the same time. One man was legally obligated to stay behind to guard the light. Why would these deeply disciplined, highly rational men break the ultimate law of their profession? The official report slammed shut, ruling the deaths an accident, but the air on Eilean Mor remained thick with a suffocating truth. The government didn't open a case to find out what happened. They opened it to cover up a nightmare they couldn't explain. As the official government report tried to bury the case under the label of a tragic accident, the public refused to believe it. The gaps in the story were too wide, and the air around Eilean Mor smelled of a cover-up. Soon, dark whispers and terrifying alternative theories began to circulate among sailors and historians alike. If a simple wave didn't wash them away, what nightmare actually unfolded inside that locked stone tower? The first, and perhaps most disturbing theory, focuses on a sudden, violent psychological breakdown. The isolation of the Flannan Isles was notorious for crushing a man's sanity. The endless howling wind, the gray void of the ocean, and the absolute confinement could drive anyone over the edge. Rumors suggested that Thomas Marshall or James Ducat snapped under the pressure. A secret, silent madness built up over weeks until it exploded into pure violence. According to this theory, one of the keepers suffered a severe psychotic episode, murdering his two companions in a fit of absolute paranoia, dragging their lifeless bodies down the steep cliffs into the dark water, and then realized the horror of his actions, threw himself into the abyss. It would perfectly explain the overturned kitchen chair and the pure dread recorded in the logbook, but others pointed to a far more calculated human threat. The year 1900 was a time of intense geopolitical tension, with spies and foreign vessels navigating the North Atlantic. Some independent researchers suggested the keepers didn't drown at all. The island occupied a highly strategic position. Did the men witness something they weren't supposed to see? A foreign military submarine or a rogue pirate vessel anchoring in the dead of night? The theory suggests a silent tactical raid on the lighthouse. The keepers could have been abducted or executed by foreign agents to keep a massive military secret safe, leaving the station pristine and locked behind them. Yet, the local Scottish fishermen avoided the island for a completely different reason. They believed in the ancient, vengeful spirit of Eilean Mor. The island had a long, bloody history of pagan rituals, and legends spoke of phantom birds and malevolent entities that guarded the rock. They believed the three men had accidentally disturbed something ancient and dark sleeping beneath the stone. In their eyes, the keepers weren't killed by waves or men. They were simply erased from existence by the island itself, serving as a terrifying reminder that some places on this earth belong strictly to the shadows. More than a century has passed since that freezing December night in 1900, yet the enigma of Eilean Mor remains completely untouched by time. The official government files were closed, the broken metal railings were replaced, and the great light of the Flannan Isles was eventually lit again. But the ghosts of the past never truly left the rock. For decades, new generations of lighthouse keepers who were stationed on the lonely island reported hearing strange, terrifying things. In the dead of night, when the Atlantic storms rattled the thick glass of the tower, men claimed to hear three distinct voices crying out from the crashing waves below, screaming their names into the wind, as if begging to be saved from a living nightmare. Over the years, modern science and high-tech equipment attempted to solve the cold case once and for all. Advanced satellite mapping, sonar scans of the ocean floor, and deep-sea divers searched the treacherous currents around the cliffs, looking for any trace of the missing men. They found nothing. No bones, no clothing, no evidence that James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, or Donald MacArthur ever touched the water. The sea salt had washed away every physical clue, leaving only an empty canvas for endless speculation. Was it a freak wave born from a silent ocean? A sudden explosion of psychological madness that turned brothers into enemies? Or did they step into a hidden corridor of reality that humans were never meant to understand? Today, the Eilean Mor lighthouse stands completely automated. In 1971, the heavy brass machinery was replaced by silent computers, and the need for human presence on the island vanished forever. No one sleeps in the small stone kitchen anymore. No one trims the wicks of the lamps, and no one writes desperate, terrified prayers into the official logbook. The island has returned to its natural state, a desolate, forbidden fortress of stone completely cut off from the civilized world. The great light still flashes every midnight, cutting through the thick white fog, guiding modern steel ships away from the deadly hidden teeth of the volcanic cliffs. But as the bright beam sweeps across the dark, empty Atlantic waters, it serves as a silent, eternal tombstone for three lonely souls who vanished into the shadows, leaving behind the greatest unsolved maritime mystery in human history.